Why the most powerful people you know always speak the least and silently observe everyone else. Marcus Aurelius ruled the most powerful empire on earth. His generals never once heard him raise his voice. In the historical records left behind by those who served him, what stands out is not the orders he gave, it is the silences between them. He would sit, he would watch, he would ask one question, sometimes just one, and then wait. And in that waiting, people revealed everything. This is not a coincidence. Every tradition that has produced genuinely powerful human beings, Stoic philosophy, Zen Buddhism, the warrior codes of ancient Japan, shares one feature that modern culture has completely abandoned. The most capable people talk the least. Not because they have nothing to say, because they understand something about speech that the average person never learns. Words are not free. Every sentence you speak is a transaction. You are exchanging something, your thinking, your position, your emotional state, for whatever response comes back. Most people make this trade constantly, automatically, without ever stopping to ask whether the exchange is worth it. They fill silences because silence makes them uncomfortable. They explain themselves because they need to feel understood. They speak first because they confuse noise with confidence. But here is what the Stoics knew that you were never taught. Epictetus was born a slave. He had no wealth, no status, no political power whatsoever. What he built, the philosophy that would later guide Marcus Aurelius himself, came entirely from one discipline, the discipline of restraint. He wrote that, "We suffer not from what happens to us, but from our reaction to it." And reaction begins with the mouth. The moment you speak impulsively, you have already lost something. The moment you explain yourself without being asked, you have already handed someone a map to your weaknesses. Silence, in this tradition, is not absence, it is presence, at its most concentrated. There is a reason the most respected monks in Zen practice go months without speaking. Not because words are evil, because the mind that learns to sit inside silence without flinching becomes a different kind of mind entirely. It stops reaching, it stops performing, it begins to see. And seeing, real, clear, undistracted seeing of what is actually happening in front of you is the foundation of every form of genuine power that has ever existed. Think about the people you personally know who carry the most real authority. Not social authority, not the loud one who dominates every conversation, not the one who always has a story that tops yours. Real authority, the kind that makes a room adjust when they walk in, the kind that makes people second-guess themselves before speaking. Those people share one quality, almost without exception. They are slow to speak, and when they do speak, people lean in. That is not personality. That is not charisma in the way modern culture sells it. That is the result of a specific internal discipline that most people will never attempt, because it requires something the modern world has trained you to avoid at all costs: discomfort. Seneca wrote in his letters to Lucilius that the primary obstacle to wisdom is not ignorance, it is noise, internal noise, the constant chatter of a mind that cannot sit still, that must always be producing, reacting, performing. He watched people around him, wealthy, educated, socially powerful people, destroy their own judgment by never once practicing stillness. They moved from conversation to conversation, opinion to opinion, reaction to reaction, mistaking all of this motion for living. But motion without stillness is just restlessness dressed up as activity. The person who speaks constantly is not communicating more. They are processing out loud, using the people around them as a sounding board for a mind that has never learned to work in private. And while they are busy processing, the quiet one across the room is collecting, reading posture, noting what topics make certain people defensive, watching who interrupts whom, measuring the gap between what someone says and how their face moves when they say it. By the time the silent one speaks, they already know the room. This is why the wisest teachers across every ancient tradition shared one instruction that their students found almost impossible to follow. Before you speak, ask yourself 3 things. Is it true? Is it necessary? Does it improve on the silence? Most of what we say every day fails all three, and we say it anyway, because the silence feels like a void that needs to be filled. But silence is not a void. This is the misunderstanding that costs most people enormously throughout their lives. Silence feels like emptiness, because the modern mind has been conditioned to treat any gap in stimulus as a problem to be solved. A lull in conversation triggers anxiety. A moment alone with no screen, no sound, no input feels unbearable after 60 seconds. People reach for their phones not because they expect anything important, but because their mind genuinely cannot tolerate the quiet. And that intolerance is the cage. Because the person who cannot sit in silence cannot observe. The person who cannot observe cannot understand what is actually happening around them. And the person who cannot understand what is actually happening, no matter how smart they are, no matter how educated, no matter how confident they sound, is always reacting to a version of reality they constructed themselves. They are not seeing the room. They are projecting onto it. The powerful observer sees the room as it actually is. That distinction between projection and perception is where real influence begins. Not in tactics, not in persuasion techniques, not in knowing what to say, in learning, first, how to be still enough to see clearly. Everything else that makes someone genuinely formidable in any environment comes from that one root, and most people never touch it. Epictetus said that nature gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Most people treat this as a polite reminder to listen more. It is not a polite reminder. It is a precise description of the ratio at which information should flow, twice as much in as out. But what nobody tells you is why that ratio matters beyond simple courtesy. It matters because the person gathering more information than they release is always operating with a strategic advantage that the talker cannot see and cannot counter. This is not about being mysterious for its own sake. The ancient Japanese warrior tradition had a concept called mukai. Roughly translated, it means to receive, to take in fully before responding. Samurai were trained not just in sword work, but in the discipline of complete reception. You receive the opponent's movement, their weight shift, their breath pattern, before your body responds. The warrior who reacts before fully receiving is the one who dies first, not because they are slower, because they are working with incomplete information. Most people in conversation are doing exactly that, dying first. They are already forming their response while the other person is still speaking, half listening, half composing. And because of this, they miss the most important part of every exchange. Not what is being said, but what is being revealed underneath it. The hesitation before a certain word. The topic someone steers away from. The question someone answers with a question. These are the real data points. And you only catch them when your mouth is closed and your attention is fully forward. Here is something that will shift how you see every conversation you have from this point. People do not reveal themselves in what they choose to say. They reveal themselves in what they choose to avoid. Watch for the gap between the question asked and the answer given. Watch for the subject that gets changed just slightly, not dramatically, just slightly, when the conversation gets close to something real. Watch for the laugh that comes a half second too early. These microsignals are broadcasting constantly in every human interaction. They are impossible to fake and almost impossible to notice if your own mental noise is running too loud. The silent observer catches all of it. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations that he was grateful to one of his teachers for a specific lesson, to never be rushed into a reply, not to take time because he was unsure, but to take time as a discipline regardless. To treat the pause before speaking as sacred rather than awkward. In a culture where quick wit was admired and public oratory was the measure of an educated man, this was a radical choice. He chose deliberateness over performance, every time, and he ran an empire of 40 million people for 19 years. There is something uncomfortable here that most people do not want to sit with. The urge to speak quickly, to have the answer ready, to fill the gap, to demonstrate that you are engaged and intelligent and present, is not confidence. It is the performance of confidence. And underneath that performance is something far more fragile. The fear that silence will be mistaken for emptiness. The fear that if you are not producing words, people will conclude there is nothing behind your eyes. But consider what actually happens when someone pauses. When a person takes 3 full seconds before answering a serious question, the room does not fill with pity. The room fills with attention. Because that pause signals something rare, that what comes next has been considered, that there is a standard being applied before words are released, that this person does not simply hand out their thinking to whoever asks. And that standard, that slight resistance, is what creates weight. Words without weight are just noise with grammar. Shi Hengyi, the Shaolin master who has trained monks for decades, speaks often about what he calls the 5 stages of mastering an art. The first stage is not technique, it is not strength, it is observation, the ability to look without interference from your own preferences, assumptions, and needs. He says most people skip this stage entirely because it looks like doing nothing. It looks passive. It looks like the opposite of progress. But every advanced skill, combat, medicine, leadership, negotiation, is built on a foundation of accurate perception. And accurate perception requires silence as a precondition. You cannot see clearly through noise. This extends far beyond conversation. The person who has trained themselves to be still, genuinely still, not performing stillness but actually inhabiting it, begins to notice patterns that others walk past every day. They notice how a colleague's energy shifts before a difficult meeting. They notice the subtle change in a friend's language when something is wrong that hasn't been named yet. They notice the unspoken agreements in a room, who defers to whom, who watches whom for approval, where the real power sits regardless of title. None of this is accessible to the person who is busy performing. And this is the brutal truth that ancient teachers delivered without softening it. Most people are not living their lives. They are narrating them, constantly, internally and externally, running a commentary on what is happening, what it means, how they feel about it, what they want others to think about it, and this narration, this relentless verbal processing, functions like static over a signal. The signal is reality. The static is everything your ego needs to say about it. Strip the static, the signal becomes clear. The Zen tradition has a practice called Shoshin, beginner's mind. It is the discipline of approaching each moment as if you know nothing about it yet, not as a philosophy but as an active posture. You bring no conclusion to the moment before the moment has spoken. You arrive empty enough to actually receive what is there. This is extraordinarily difficult for intelligent people, because intelligent people are faster than average at pattern matching, at deciding they already know what this situation is before they have fully looked at it. That speed is the trap. The smartest people in the room are often the last to see what is actually happening, because their minds close fastest around an explanation. The quiet observer who claims no particular intelligence, who simply watches without rushing to conclude, often understands the room more accurately than anyone with a theory about it. This is why wisdom and intelligence are not the same thing. Intelligence is processing speed. Wisdom is knowing when not to process, when to simply receive. And receiving requires one thing above everything else: silence. Seneca wrote to Lucilius, "Retire into yourself as much as you can." He did not mean physically. He did not mean become a hermit or cut yourself off from the world. He meant something far more demanding than that. He meant stop leaking. Stop allowing every passing emotion, every social pressure, every uncomfortable silence to pull you outward into reaction. Build an interior, a place inside yourself that is not available to everyone who walks into the room. Most people have no such place. Their interior is completely public. You can read their mood from across the room before they open their mouth. Every frustration surfaces immediately. Every insecurity announces itself. Every desire gets telegraphed the moment it appears. They are entirely readable, not because they are honest, but because they have never developed the discipline of interior privacy. They have no boundary between what they feel and what they show, and that transparency costs them constantly. Here is what nobody teaches in any school, in any professional development course, in any self-help framework built around authentic expression. Privacy is power, not secrecy for the sake of manipulation, not concealment as a strategy, but the genuine capacity to hold something inside without immediately releasing it, to feel something fully without making it everyone else's business, is one of the rarest and most respected qualities a human being can develop. The person who cannot hold anything inside cannot hold anything at all. Think about what happens in a negotiation. Any negotiation, whether it is a salary discussion, a difficult conversation with someone you love, or a business deal. The first person to reveal how much they want the outcome is the first person to lose leverage. Not because wanting is wrong, because exposed wanting is a handle. It gives the other party something to hold and pull. The moment your need is visible, you are no longer negotiating from strength. You are negotiating from exposure. The silent observer never hands over that handle. Marcus Aurelius understood this at a level that went beyond strategy. In the Meditations, he returned again and again to one theme: the separation between what happens and what you choose to make of it. This gap, this space between event and response, was not just a philosophical idea to him. It was the thing he practiced every single morning before the demands of empire arrived at his door. He trained the gap. He widened it deliberately, day after day, through writing, through reflection, through the discipline of not reacting immediately to anything. That gap is where character lives. The person with no gap between stimulus and response is entirely controlled by their environment. Someone says something cutting, they react. Something goes wrong, they show it instantly. An opportunity appears, their excitement is already on their face. They are being played like an instrument by everything around them, not because they are weak people, but because they never built the internal distance required to choose their response rather than simply produce it. Building that distance is not comfortable work. It requires sitting with feelings that want to move, anger that wants to speak, excitement that wants to announce itself, hurt that wants to be acknowledged right now. Holding these things, not suppressing them but genuinely containing them until the right moment, or until you decide there is no right moment, is a form of strength that looks like nothing from the outside. Nobody applauds it, nobody sees it, it produces no immediate reward. That is exactly why most people never develop it. Zen teachers speak of a quality called Fudoshin, immovable mind, not a mind that feels nothing, a mind that cannot be thrown. The image they use is a large tree in a storm. The branches move, the leaves tear loose, the whole structure bends under the force of the wind, but the roots do not move. And because the roots do not move, the tree survives what would destroy something shallower. Your reactions are the branches, your character is the root system. Most people spend their entire lives tending the branches, managing how they come across, adjusting their words, trying to produce the right impression in real time. And because all their attention is on the surface, the roots stay shallow. One strong wind, and the whole structure goes over. A single harsh criticism, a sudden failure, an unexpected betrayal, and everything collapses, because there was never anything deep enough to hold. The silent one is building roots while everyone else is arranging branches. This is the part of the discipline that is most misunderstood, even by people who intellectually grasp what silence is for. They think the practice is about external behavior. Speak less, listen more, pause before answering. These are real instructions, and they matter. But they are the surface of something that goes much deeper. The external silence is only sustainable if there is internal silence underneath it. An internal silence, genuine quiet inside a person, is not the absence of thought. It is the absence of compulsion, the absence of the desperate need to react, to be seen, to be understood, to fill every gap. A person who has built that internal quiet is fundamentally different from one who has not. You feel it immediately when you are around them. There is no urgency leaking from them, no performance, no hunger for your approval or your attention. They are complete in a way that makes you slightly uncomfortable if you are not used to it, because most of us are so accustomed to people wanting something from us in every interaction that someone who genuinely wants nothing reads as strange. That strangeness is authority. Epictetus taught that the only things truly within our control are our own judgments, impulses, desires, and aversions. Everything else, reputation, outcomes, other people's opinions, lies outside the boundary of what we can govern. Most people spend their lives trying to control what is outside them, while leaving what is inside them completely ungoverned. They are disciplined about their schedule and sloppy about their mind, disciplined about their appearance, and completely at the mercy of their emotions. The real discipline goes inward, and the practice begins not in dramatic moments but in small ones. The moment in conversation when you feel the urge to defend yourself and you choose to stay quiet and simply observe how the other person interprets your silence. The moment when someone takes credit for your work and you do not immediately correct the record, not because it doesn't matter, but because you are training the muscle of restraint in low-stakes situations so it is available in high-stakes ones. The moment when silence would be awkward and you let it be awkward without rushing to dissolve it. Each of these is a small root going deeper. And over time, not weeks, years, something shifts. The need to be understood starts to loosen. The need to perform starts to quiet. The hunger for immediate validation, for the room to confirm that you are smart and capable and worth listening to, begins to matter less. Not because you stop caring about your life and your work, but because you have built enough internal substance that you no longer need constant external confirmation to feel real. That is when the silence becomes natural. That is when people start watching you the way you used to watch others. That is when you walk into a room and something changes without you doing anything at all. Not because you have mastered a technique, because you have become someone who no longer needs the room. And needing nothing, truly needing nothing from an interaction, is the most powerful position any human being can occupy. Here is the truth, that everything in this teaching has been building toward, and it is harder than anything said so far. You already know silence is powerful. You have known it for a long time. You have watched the quiet person in the room command more gravity than the loudest one. You have felt the weight of someone who speaks once and lands harder than someone who spoke 20 times. You know this. The knowledge is not the problem. The problem is that knowing and becoming are separated by something most people are not willing to cross. That distance is not crossed through information. It is not crossed through motivation. It is not crossed through watching videos about discipline or reading books about Stoic philosophy, including everything you have heard in this teaching. All of that is still inside the category of consuming, and consumption, no matter how high its quality, does not build the thing being described. Only practice builds it. Only the repeated, unglamorous, unrewarded act of choosing silence when everything in you wants to speak. And that choice is far more costly than it sounds, because what you are giving up when you commit to this discipline is not just the habit of talking too much. You are giving up the primary way most people manage anxiety. Speech is self-soothing. Filling silence is self-soothing. Explaining yourself is self-soothing. Narrating your own experience out loud, to friends, to colleagues, in your own head, is how most people regulate the discomfort of being alive in an uncertain world. Strip that away, and what remains is the raw discomfort itself, with nothing to cover it. Most people get one look at that and immediately reach for the noise again. The Stoics called this the discipline of desire, not the elimination of wanting, but the rigorous examination of what you are actually chasing and why. Most people who want to become quieter, more observant, more internally powerful, want it for the same reason they want everything else. They want the result without the process. They want to be the person in the room who commands silence without having sat in silence themselves for long enough that it stopped being uncomfortable. But the room always knows. You cannot perform groundedness. You cannot fake the quality of someone who genuinely does not need the room's approval, because that need, or its absence, is not in your words. It is in your body. It is in the half second before you respond. It is in whether your eyes move when someone challenges you, It is in whether you reach for your phone when the conversation dies. These signals broadcast below the level of conscious control, and the people who have done this work themselves can read them instantly. Trying to appear silent is noisier than just speaking. Marcus Aurelius wrote something in the Meditations that most people skip past because it does not sound as quotable as his famous lines about death and duty. He wrote that he had wasted years, trying to improve in the wrong direction, trying to change his behavior before he had changed what was underneath his behavior. The surface kept reverting because the foundation had not moved. He was trimming leaves from a tree whose roots were pulling in a completely different direction. What changes the roots is not intention. It is repeated experience of a different way of being. This means the practice is not reading about silence. The practice is the next conversation you have, where you feel the urge to fill a pause and you simply do not. The practice is the next time someone misunderstands you and you let the misunderstanding stand, because correcting it immediately would cost you more than it would gain. The practice is sitting alone for 30 minutes with no input, no phone, no music, no podcast running in the background, and staying there when the discomfort arrives, which it will, usually within the first 4 minutes. That discomfort is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that something is working. The ancient teachers were unanimous on this point across every tradition. Discomfort in practice is not the obstacle. Discomfort is the practice. The monk who cannot sit in silence without reaching for distraction has not yet begun. The student who understands every philosophical principle but cannot hold still for 10 minutes has acquired knowledge without building anything. Knowledge about strength is not strength. Understanding silence intellectually is not silence. There is no shortcut between the map and the territory. Shi Hengyi teaches that true mastery in any domain passes through 5 distinct gates. The first gate is ignorance. You do not know what you do not know. The second is awareness. You begin to see the gap between where you are and where mastery lives. Most people stop here. They become aware of the gap, feel how large it is, and decide the distance is too great. They settle for the sophistication of talking about mastery instead of pursuing it. They become students of the idea rather than practitioners of the thing. Staying at the second gate, your whole life is its own kind of trap, because it is comfortable enough. You know enough to sound serious. You know enough to recognize the real thing when you see it, but you have not paid the price of actually crossing into it. The price is specific. It is the conversation where you stay quiet and someone walks away thinking less of you and you do not chase them to correct their impression. It is the meeting where you have the answer and you wait, not strategically, not to seem mysterious, but because you are training the reflex of restraint until it becomes faster than the reflex of reaction. It is the relationship where someone pushes against your silence and you hold it anyway, not coldly, not as punishment, but because you have decided that your interior is yours and access to it must be earned. These moments are not dramatic. Nobody sees them. Nobody rewards them. And that invisibility is the final test. Because the person who only practices discipline when it is visible, when it might be noticed, when there is some social reward attached to it, has not developed discipline at all. They have developed performance. And performance, under enough pressure, always cracks. Real character is what remains when there is no audience, no reward, no recognition. What remains when no one is watching, that is what you actually are. This is the devastating truth that the whole of this teaching has been circling. You are not what you intend to be. You are not what you believe yourself to be. You are not the self-image you have constructed from your best moments and your most generous interpretations of your own behavior. You are the sum of what you do when it costs something and no one is there to see it. Most people, if they are honest, do not like what they find when they look there. And that honesty, that clear-eyed, uncomfortably direct look at the gap between who you perform yourself to be and who you actually are in private, is where this work begins. not with techniques, not with a new habit tracker or a morning routine or a list of things to do differently in conversations, with one unflinching look at the distance between the self you present and the self that exists when the presentation stops. That look requires silence too, because the moment you start narrating what you find, you start managing it. You start making it more acceptable, more understandable, more forgivable. The mind is extraordinarily skilled at converting honest self-perception into a story that maintains your self-image. The only way to see yourself clearly is to look without immediately explaining what you see. Sit with it. Let it be what it is. Do not rush to fix it or frame it. That sitting, uncomfortable, unrewarded, invisible, is the beginning of every transformation that has ever actually lasted. Not the insight, not the decision to change, the sitting, the willingness to be exactly where you are, seeing exactly what is there, without immediately running from it into noise and motion and explanation. Marcus Aurelius returned to his journal every single morning, not because writing made him feel better. He returned because it was the one place he could not lie to himself. No audience, no empire, no role to perform, just a man looking directly at what he was and what he was failing to be. He did this for decades, and what those journals produced, what that daily, private, unrewarded practice of honest self-examination built, was not a perfect man. It was a man who could not be easily moved, a man whose silence meant something, because everything behind it was real. That is what this path actually produces. Not charisma, not mystery, not a set of conversational advantages. A person who is real all the way through, whose stillness is not a pose, whose quiet is not a strategy, whose presence lands because there is genuine weight behind it. Weight takes years to build. There is no faster way. So here is where you actually are right now. You have heard the teaching. You understand the principle. You can probably already feel the gap between where you are and what is being described. That gap is not a problem. That gap is the work. Every day you choose to sit in silence a little longer than is comfortable, every conversation where you receive more than you release, every moment you hold your reaction when everything in you wants to speak, you are closing that gap by exactly that much. Not quickly, not dramatically, but permanently. The quiet ones you admire did not arrive there by deciding to be quiet. They arrived there by paying, repeatedly and without reward, the price of becoming someone whose silence has earned the right to be heard. That price is available to you. It has always been available to you. The only question is whether you are willing to stop talking long enough to start paying it. If this teaching reached something real in you, if it landed in a place that other things have not, then stay close. More wisdom like this is coming. Subscribe, and when the next teaching arrives, you will already be a little more ready for it than you were today.